Hello everyone, we are going to start on our second lesson on the Vietnam War. Today's lesson focuses on the conflict between North and South Vietnam. Okay, now if you remember, all right, the last lesson we talked about how Vietnam was divided into two halves along the 17th parallel line, and there was a two there was two there were two different system of governance in Vietnam. Okay, North Vietnam was communist led, and it was led by Ho Chi Minh. All right, on the southern side, we had a democratic system of governance, and it was led by DM. All right, now although both of them were ideologically different, the kind of ruling method or the style of ruling by both sets of leaders remained very much similar. Both Ho Chi Minh as well as DM actually had a very authoritarian style of governance. All right, neither was actually very tolerant of opposition. Okay, and they worked very quickly to arrest anyone whom they thought was a threat to their governance. All right, so let's focus on Ho Chi Minh first. Now, if you look at Ho Chi Minh, he was actually governing this part, which is the North Vietnam, and a lot of people who actually were not very comfortable with the idea of communism fled from North Vietnam to the southern side, okay, because they feared communist rule, about losing their land, about the kind of consequences that they may actually face under Ho Chi Minh's governance. So as soon as this announcement was made that Vietnam was going to be divided, all right, those who feared communism fled from the north and they ran into the south, all right. Now, similarly, those who actually preferred Ho Chi Minh's governance fled from the south and they went to the north, all right. So at the end of the day, you will see that many Viet Minh and communist supporters in the south added to Ho Chi Minh's strength in the North Vietnam when they, with so many of them moving over to the northern side. Okay, now Ho had a lot of support in North Vietnam um, because of the fact that he was recognized as a great leader who had fought the Japanese as well as the French. All right, now on top of that, Ho had the backing of a lot of the farmers, the poor people in Vietnam, because one of the things that Ho Chi Minh did was he ensured land reforms took place. Now, what are land reforms and how did it benefit the people? All right, so a lot of the larger, wealthier landowners who had exploited the poor farmers, what he did was he took the land from them and he redistributed these parcels of land to the peasant farmers, all right, so that they were able to be independent farmers, all right, and not tenant farmers or work for someone who could exploit them, all right. So this kind of reforms won the love and the support for Ho Chi Minh. All right. In addition to that, he also made an example of many of the landlords who had exploited these poor farmers. Now, sometimes these farmers were these sorry not farmers these landlords were actually um, arrested and they underwent these trials that came to be known as show trials. And what are these show trials? These show trials are basically not exactly a formal trial where they are given an opportunity to defend themselves. So these trials, you have these landowners coming in and they admit that they have done something wrong or they have exploited the poor. They are not given an opportunity to a fair trial or defense, all right. So it was really to make an example of them and punish them, okay. These land reforms, as I mentioned earlier, they were popular, okay. But at the end of the day, when you have little parcels of land and you work on a tiny parcel of land, the productivity level is not going to be very high. So not surprisingly, there was a decline in agricultural output, okay, and the amount of foodstuff that was actually um, uh, that was imported into Vietnam actually declined. All right, so this caused famines in North Vietnam. Okay, so with output becoming less and what do you call that? With imports uh, coming in less as well, you find that there was famine in North Vietnam. But in spite of that, Ho Chi Minh remained very popular in the northern part of Vietnam. All right. So, what were some things that Ho Chi Minh did in order to create or ensure stability in North Vietnam? One of the things that he did was anyone who resisted um, his governance, particularly the large landowners, all right, if they were to resist what he was planning in terms of land reforms, they were arrested and they were executed. All right. But even though he was very harsh, okay, in dealing with his opponents, there was some kind of political stability because of the fact that the large population of the poor supported Ho Chi Minh, and the fact that he was able to clamp down on any resistance also land itself to the uh, also allowed North Vietnam to be more stable, okay, politically. Now we come to the southern side. What did the southern side look like? All right. I mean, after all, it was democratic, so we would expect the people in the southern side of Vietnam to enjoy freedom of speech, freedom to practice their religion, to become economically stable, to have opportunities, to build their wealth. All right. So we expect all of this. But instead, what we see is we see a Diem who was um, just a hardcore anti communist. He was, of course, a patriot who loved his country and all that, but he was not someone who was interested in the well being of the masses. All right. Yes, he wanted to modernize Vietnamese economy. He wanted to make it a modern city. All right. A modern country. All right. He wanted to strengthen the country against foreign powers interference. All of that was well and good. And to that extent, he did implement modernization programs such as construction of universities, expansion of agriculture. He tried to transform communities in the countryside to create a national identity and to localize democracy. But in all of these measures, unfortunately, did not lead to his popularity. He remained unpopular because of his authoritarian methods. Okay, there was a huge amount of imprisonment. Opponents were executed. Okay, so quite similar in nature to what Ho Chi Minh was doing to the wealthy landowners who opposed him in the north. All right. Also, he was not as open as he presented himself at the beginning. All right, you could tell that he was not very keen on holding an election in Vietnam. All right, in fact, in 1955, he announced that there would not be an election, um, you know, in 1956. All right, instead, he held a referendum, and this referendum was held in order to remove head of state Bao Dai. Now, Bao Dai was actually the last emperor of Vietnam. You can see his photograph on the right hand side, and this photograph is courtesy of the Wikipedia. All right. Now, what Diem wanted was he wanted to remove Bao Dai and install himself as president. So you could see that Diem is actually quite power hungry. All right. The thing is, he wanted to show that he had the mandate of the people. So what did he do? He actually shared the results of the vote to the people. He said that 98% of the voters actually approved Diem becoming president. But this was really rigged. All right. In some areas, it was ridiculous because you had more votes than the number of voters. I mean, that clearly shows that there were a lot of um, uh, fake votes or whatever that was done to get him the mandate that he thought he needed, or justification that he needed from the people. All right. Diem's actions had U.S. support, and U.S. did a lot of financial and military backing, provided him with a lot of financial and military backing. Okay, why was that so? It's because of the fact that he was strongly anti-communist, and he was prepared to deal harshly with them. That was the only reason why America actually backed Diem so strongly. All right, the fact that they were in alignment in terms of their ideology. Okay. Um, All right, now they did try to pressure Diem into land reforms and to help the poor by distributing land to the poor, which the Americans saw it as a way to increase support for Diem and his government, and also to prevent the communists from successfully winning the hearts and minds of the poor people in Vietnam. All right, and he was hoping that by the Americans were hoping that if Diem were to do this successfully, whatever communist efforts that they were using in order to sway the peasants would actually be ineffective. All right, but of course Diem was not interested because his supporters were mostly the landlords. Okay, so he carried out some land reforms, but they were really not very effective. Okay, and they hardly benefited the peasants. Okay, and most of the landlords held on to their wealth, and it became quite difficult for him to get any headway in terms of the land reforms. All right, Diem's regime was basically well known for corruption, and he practiced nepotism, okay, by appointing his family members in key positions in government. So you could see that he's not interested in uh, any form of meritocracy and giving the appointing the right people for the right kind of job. He was more interested in putting his relatives in key positions of power. And it didn't help that he was not going to hold any elections, even for the local councils. All right, so you can see that he was obsessed with holding on to power, position, and money. All right, and not surprisingly, govern- his governance was met with a lot of opposition. Okay, the well-educated and influential Buddhist monks, all right, did protest against his regime. All right, they felt disrespected by Diem because Diem was pro-Catholic and his pro-Catholic policies antagonized the Buddhist majority. All right, so he was not showing the Buddhists much respect. Okay, so much for being a democratic nation where people have the freedom to practice their religion. It's quite clear that Diem was not in favor of Buddhism, and therefore he kind of like antagonized the Buddhists. So, not surprisingly, some Buddhist monks protested through self immolation. Now, if you could see the photograph on the right, okay, it clearly, this is one example of the many where the Buddhist monks actually protested. And this kind of like contributed to Diem's unpopularity. Now, the US was frustrated and concerned by Diem's actions and could not find any other better candidate. All right, so they did feel that Diem was unsuitable. They did acknowledge that he is not the best person for the job, but they could do little about it because there was really no one else who was suitable to lead the governance, all right? That lead the government, all right? So despite US support, Diem's regime was weak and unable to prevent a communist insurgency in the countryside. So this insurgency is actually the start of the war, of the conflict between the north and the southern side of Vietnam. All right, so and this eventually gets into a full-scale war, all right, between both sides, and you see other external players coming in to exert their influence. All right, so let's look at what actually happens between 54 to 60, all right? So the Buddhist monks were not the only one who actually opposed Diem's government, all right? There were various groups, such as the former members of the Viet Minh, who also opposed Diem's regime, all right? And they, because they believed in a united Vietnam. Now recall that the Viet Minh was actually made up of communist and non-communist members, all right? And for Viet Minh to actually oppose Diem's governance, there is a high chance that even the non-communist faction of Viet Minh now believes that Diem's regime is not the most suitable to rule Vietnam. All right. So after Diem's cancellation of the promised elections, many former Viet Minh members started to wage low-level campaigns of disruption and harassment against his regime. Okay, so they were trying to sabotage him and his government. Okay, and basically hoping that they would be able to pressurize him to take some positive measures. All right. Now, how did Diem respond to this insurgency? Now, he did what he was always, what do you call that, well known for, which is to implement repressive measures, to act very sternly and harshly towards these groups of people who rose up against him. Okay? And thousands of suspected communists were locked up, tortured, and executed. Now, I want you to look at the keyword suspected communists. So many of them who were locked up, tortured, and executed were not even communists. All right. So yes, they protested against his government, but they did not necessarily believe in communism. But you could see that his actions basically assumed that if you were opposed to me, you are likely to be communist and therefore subjected to torture and execution. All right. Now, he also tried to strike at the insurgents' military bases. He had some success, all right, but this did not stop the 1959 insurgency. All right. The North Vietnam Communist Party approved the setting up of this group known as 559, and this is basically a specialized unit of the North Vietnamese army. So you can see now that it's not just the South, but the unit in the North is actually coming in to participate in this insurgency. All right. Now, what was their job? What was the role of this North Vietnamese army? The job was to transport weapons and munitions, other equipment to the Viet Cong. All right. The insurgents who had formally organized themselves by 1960. Now, what is the difference between the Viet Minh and the Viet Cong? Now, I told you that in the Viet Minh, there were some who were non-communists, but they joined in because they believed in the idea of a united Vietnam, all right, or an independent Vietnam. Now, the Viet Cong, all right, these insurgents were all communists. I need you to remember that. They believed in the communist ideology, all right? So this, what do you call that, Viet Cong comprised large numbers of communist North Vietnamese taking orders from Ho Chi Minh. And between 57 to 60, they carried out 1,700 assassinations. All right, 1,700 assassination. Attacked anyone associated with the South Vietnamese government, and this included police officers, officers of the law courts, administrators, all right, anyone who was associated with the Vietnamese government, they were considered as an enemy, and they assassinated them. They also assassinated anyone suspected of collaborating with the government as well, and they staged the attacks on government forces as well. All right, so you could also see that, well, these people also adopted a similar Diem style in a sense, because if you look at it, suspected of collaborating, which appears to be quite similar to what Diem did as well. All right, anyone suspected, all right, of being communist, he executed. Now you see the Viet Cong doing the same thing. Anyone suspected of being collaborating with the government also killed. All right, so both of them were quite aggressive in nature. Okay, now what does the I mean, you know that a lot of the North Vietnamese were coming in to participate in this southern insurgency, so they needed to create a supply route from the north to the south, given the fact that it is divided. You will see DMZ. Now, DMZ on the map over here actually tells you that this is a demilitarized zone. Okay, so from here to here, southern Vietnam, this is the center portion along the 17 parallel line is actually a demilitarized zone. All right, but you will notice that there is another pathway, trail that's actually created. And this trail is called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. All right, and this is where you see the supply of food, ammunition, and all that was made from the north to the south. Okay, and this would also later become a central resource area in the conflict, which would escalate much later. All right. By the early 1960s, the insurgency was growing. Okay, and Diem's government was clearly in trouble. All right. Okay, so this was what I mentioned earlier, who were the Viet Minh and who were the Viet Cong. So I want to take a moment to explain this clearly so there's no misunderstanding when we're talking about who these two groups of people are. So the Viet Minh, remember, they fought against the French. And what were they fighting for? For independence from French colonial rule. The Viet Minh were also the ones who fought against the Japanese. And they were made up of people who were non-communists and communists who were working together for towards a common goal. Now, when we talk about the Viet Cong, the red box on the right, we're talking about insurgents who had formally organized themselves by 1960, and they fought against the US-backed Southern Vietnam government, and this was between 1955 to 1975. You can see that there is a bit of a difference in the timeline as well. Okay, so do note so that you do not have any confusion when you're writing your essay or learning this chapter. Okay, all right. We hope that at the end of this lesson you will be able to try out this essay on explain how did Diem contributed to the start of the Vietnam War. All right, so when you are attempting this question, I want you to think about his policies, Diem's own personality, his actions, all right, when you are answering this question. Okay, remember that the key word is how. How did he contribute to the start of the Vietnam War? And if you look at what we have covered so far, okay, I want you to understand that that we are looking at the insurgency starting because of the fact that Diem did certain things that caused a lot of unhappiness in southern Vietnam. All right. Now with that, we will end lesson 2. I hope you had understood what we are looking at. We are looking at the insurgency in the south and how this later on becomes blown up into a large war.